Welcome to the Regenerative Brands podcast. This is a place for consumers, operators, and investors to learn about the consumer brands supporting regenerative agriculture and how they're changing the world. This is your host, Kyle, joined by my co-host, AC, who's going to take us into the episode.
On this episode, we have Dana Ehrlich, who is the founder of Verde Farms. Verde Farms is supporting regenerative agriculture with its lineup of 100% USDA organic and grass-fed and grass-finished beef products. They have recently begun working with Land and Market to transition their supply to fully regenerative and have begun certifying certain SKUs. In this episode, Dana shares the health and tourism journey that led him to South American grass-fed beef, plus how they've grown the brand over time very unconventionally through private label business and branded sales to conventional and mass retailers. Verde Farms is growing 50% year over year with category-leading velocities and recently took on its first major investment while also transitioning to self-manufacturing. Tons of fun topics in this one, y'all, on all things CPG. Plus, Dana shares the behind-the-scenes look at getting their farmers to adopt more regenerative practices. Here's a hint. The incentives have to do with boosting on-farm profitability. Here we go. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Regen Brands podcast. Very excited today to have our friend Dana from Verde Farms with us. So welcome, Dana.
Thank you very much for having me.
Dana, we're stoked as always. You know, our listeners are probably tired of us saying this, but AC and I both feel the impact of animals, especially when raised right, can be so tremendous for both human and planetary health. So we're super pumped to get to showcase another story in that vein. So for those who are unfamiliar with Verde Farms, give us a quick lay of the land. What sort of products do you produce? Where can people find you today?
So again, thanks for having me on. So Verde is a leading brand of organic grass-fed pasture-raised beef. We predominantly sell to retail customers across the U.S., folks like BJ's and the Club Channel, Amazon Fresh, Kroger, Albertsons, and many other points of distribution.
BJ's, I was not expecting to hear that. Really cool to hear that there's regen beef at BJ's. Like, out of curiosity, what's the price point for like a pound of ground?
So we have a couple different lean points there. We have both an 85 and 15 and a 93.7, and I think they're in the kind of $6 to $7 per pound price point.
Really accessible. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, and that was definitely, we'll get into the origin story, but one of the things that I wanted to do was democratize grass-fed beef and get it out to the masses, and really started from nothing. And to be able to go, we're in 100% of the BJ clubs, and to get it out nationwide and, you know, lots of points of distribution has been a very exciting journey.
Yeah, it's been fun to watch that proliferation in the grass-fed beef space. I mean, you started this brand in 2005. I think I was in 5th or 6th grade then, so I was not along for the whole ride as
Thanks,
an adult. But no, I mean, it's a testament to, like, most of the brands we've talked to that have scaled to the point that y'all are at. Like, it takes a long time. Like, it takes a long time to build these regenerative supply chains and do it correctly, and to create symbiotic relationships with retailers and consumers. And so really excited to dive deep into that whole story today, but want you to take us all the way back to really how this all got started with some personal health challenges that you had, Dana.
Yeah. So the company really officially formally launched in 2005, but the story actually started a couple years before that. So I started my career in Silicon Valley. I was a semiconductor manufacturing engineer and product manager at Intel, and then
a little different than grass-fed beef.
Hardware engineer.
The natural reroute to grass-fed beef.
Yeah.
Makes total
People
sense.
don't understand that was a natural transition for me. So I wanted to get out of high tech and do something that I was more passionate about. And got into business school at Dartmouth, took a year off to backpack around the world, which was an awesome experience, and was really interested in doing something entrepreneurial. Wasn't sure what I wanted to do, really loved travel, really loved food. And it was during a semester abroad when I went to live and study in Buenos Aires in Argentina, where I really discovered grass-fed beef. I grew up in the suburbs of Boston. It was just red meat in a styrofoam package. I didn't know anything about supply chains. I didn't know the difference between a ribeye and a strip loin. And so this was all really, really new. But when I came back to the States in January of 2005, I was looking for Argentinian beef or grass-fed beef and had a bad meal at a steakhouse. And that was really the aha moment where I thought, there's some opportunity here. And then really started looking into the major trends in the U.S. in terms of health and wellness, animal welfare, environmental sustainability, and organic livestock standards had just been finalized in the early 2000s. And so this intersection between organic and grass-fed really fit with those major trends in the U.S. On the personal side, which you mentioned, I had just been diagnosed with ulcerative colitis right around a couple of years before that. And so when I ate certain foods, it would really affect my GI.
Yeah.
And, I went through different medicines, different mindfulness, different, adjusting stress levels and so on. And I found when I ate all the beef down in Argentina, I could eat as much as I want. It was both delicious, but it never bothered my system like the grain finished beef did. And so that kind of personal impact, plus going out to an estancia, which is like a working bed and breakfast cattle ranch out in the province of Buenos Aires, got to see how the cattle are actually raised. Gauchos on horseback eating red meat cooked over open flame outside, drinking Malbec under the stars, is pretty enticing. And that combined with coming back to the U.S. really kicked things off.
Yeah.
Man, what a beautiful story. You really romanced that well. Like, this sounds like I need to go do that.
This is like the South American Yellowstone. I want to be there,
Yeah.
I'm ready to go. Dana, do you remember, can you articulate or describe what it was like walking through a regular grocery store at that time? Because I was too young to remember that, but what were the options?
So the second time you called me old in about 5 minutes. And
see, you're taking it that way. That's not how I'm meaning it. I'm looking to be educated. I'm looking for your wisdom. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah, you're just making me look better, so I'm fine with it. Keep going down that path.
So you're a good cop today.
Yeah, so I'm turning 50 in 2 weeks, and when I started this, 29, 30. And so when I shopped, there were a lot less options than we have today. And some ways it's different, some ways it's not. You've got a wall of red meat. And I think we grew up with mom cooking in the kitchen and knowing different cuts, but not that education not really getting passed down. And so I think it's intimidating when people go to a supermarket. First, for people that didn't grow up in the countryside around cattle, they have no idea, the different breeds, what makes a tender cut versus a non-tender cut, different cooking methods. I think it's really intimidating to go to a supermarket, and when you see different cuts of red meat and styrofoam package on a big wall without any instructions, I think it's hard for people to know what to purchase. You fast forward that today, and now you've got all these different claims: organic, grass-fed, regen, never ever, feedlot. And again, unless you're in the sector, I think it's really hard for the consumers to know what the difference is between the different options that are out there. So, price point is certainly a guide. I think packaging, just like in wine, is a guide. But to really understand what things mean is very, very challenging for layperson, which I think is the vast, vast majority of the consumers we're talking about.
Yeah.
Dana, I couldn't agree more with that. And even as somebody who's worked in the natural space for more than 10 years, I'm often the more I learn about food, the more I realize it is so complicated. The type of soil it's on, the soil health, the biodiversity of the diet of the animal, where it's processed, how it's processed. It is so complicated. So I think that's a really good point you made. But before we deviate too far away from the health journey story, I'm really curious about this physical or physiological reaction you had to the grass-fed beef versus the standard American grain-finished beef. Do you have a sense for nutritionally speaking why your body with ulcerative colitis was able to tolerate the 100% grass-fed grass-finished so much better than the alternative?
And I'm an engineer and I've got a chemistry minor undergrad. It's hard to tell exactly the dynamics between the food we ingest and the why. And I think particularly for those with colitis, it's very much an individual experience. There are certain things
Mm-hmm.
that I could tolerate that other people that have the same illness cannot. And so I think it's very much an individual journey. And depending on how active the disease could be, there are certain things where when it's not active, I could eat popcorn. When it is, like, don't eat anything, that's hard and fibrous. And so I think it's really just about being self-aware and in tune in terms of what the body can and can't handle. Fast forward many years later, I do think, you are what you eat. And if the animals aren't moving in a feedlot, they're eating grains, you're going to get a lot of fat on the animals. And traditionally, that's what we've measured. That's what the U.S. grading system has been built around. I find the grass-fed meat has more flavor. Generally, it's more fat, although I'd say as the quality of the beef, particularly the grass-fed beef, has improved, and I think regen is a big component, the fat levels have actually increased as well. So it's a more both tender, flavorful steak. But I also think the fat is a healthier fat than what you would get in a grain-finished product as well.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about genetics and forage diversity and all the things that actually go into that end product, which we've talked about on some episodes and happy to go into today. But before we do, I want to close the loop on the origin story. So you have this very formidable health experience journey. You go to South America, you see this. You said you had this interest in food. Were you in the MBA program thinking I'm going to start a food business, or was this basically just a giant light bulb moment where you just hit it and ran with it? What was that big, shift or critical deciding factor like?
Yeah, so going into business school, I wanted to do something entrepreneurial and wasn't sure what that was going to be. I did this whole year of backpacking around the world, 20 plus countries, multiple continents, Europe, Africa, Southeast Asia, Brazil, Central America. Amazing experience. And I actually got very close to starting an adventure travel company. And so that was actually the reason that I went to Argentina, was improving my Spanish and starting trips to Patagonia. And then obviously got sidetracked with the beef and my aha moment. I always, whenever I traveled, people would ask me how the trip was, and I'd always start with the food. And so I always, not a professional, but always had, high level of interest in food. And then I always had a high level of interest in environmental issues. So during my undergrad at UPenn, I did my senior thesis on for-profit business models to solve clean air issues. And so I very much think what Verde is doing is using food as a mechanism to solve planet climatic issues. And food is the mechanism to do that. So I think that's really the right way to go. And if people value that, they'll pay for it. And I think, the industry's obviously grown tremendously over the years.
Dana, I love what you shared. And I'm reading a book right now called The End of Craving. It's the same author as The Dorito Effect. The HC is going to roll his eyes at me. And this new book is fascinating. But he talks about how humans are so in tune with food and how it's so important for us to be able to understand what we're consuming. From a DNA perspective, there is more DNA allocated to the development of the mouth and the nose than any other body part in the human body. And from a gray matter perspective, there's more gray matter activated when we're consuming food than any other activity humans participate in. So to your point,
what's gray matter?
Food. What's gray matter? Is just the essentially the parts of
brain
your
activity?
brain, essentially. Yeah, it's just brain mass is gray matter.
Wow.
Right? It's I guess it's not distinguishing between the specific lobes or parts of the brain. It's just total brain activity. Okay. Obviously, I'm not an expert in gray matter, so we pointed that out.
Brother, that was eloquent. You can plug all the books you want. I love that. That was great.
We're doing it. But yeah, so Dana, to your point, food is it's this, evolutionarily speaking, we are developed as a species because of how much we appreciate food. So just want to highlight that.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's so many aspects of food. Obviously, we need it to survive. But there's such a cultural aspect to it of, being with friends and family, literally back to sitting around the fire and eating, and also in terms of just being an active athlete. Both my co-founder and I, we've done triathlons and marathons, and pretty active. And it's just part of the fueling the body with the right types of foods and trying to avoid the Doritos and all that other stuff.
Yeah, no doubt. So I'm curious, getting back to the origin story, you come back from this travel, you realize I want to do something with grass-fed meat. How do you go from concept to like the beginning, like the formation of this company?
Yeah. So, I mean, so again, January 2005, I think that there's something here, but again, I know nothing about it coming from the high tech sector. And so I start to look into what are the major trends in the US. How does organic and grass-fed beef potentially fit into that? We had, depending on who you ask, either an Argentinian barbecue or a South American barbecue that was in May of every year. And that was my test launch event. And so that was the first time I ever sourced beef. And, I contacted what is now one of our largest suppliers, where we buy like hundreds of thousands of pounds a week. And I'm like, hey, I need like 200 pounds of beef for this event. And even with an Argentinian classmate of mine, they won't answer my phone calls. They're like, who is this guy? I've never heard of him. I don't want to waste my time. And so, eventually I found like a local distributor and we set up an account. I was just learning about setting up, chart of accounts and AR and AP and, just the mechanics of how do you form an LLC? How do you set up a business checking account? At the time, how do you set up a website and reserve a URL? Things that now that might have taken me like a year, that might take me like a week to do today. And some of those things were really challenging just mechanically. But it was that event was the first one. And, it was a gorgeous day. Everyone's eating tons of beef and drinking beer out in the quad. And that was such a great
experience. I need specifics. Like, you didn't just make beef. What kind of beef did you make? I mean, we talking burgers? You were doing barbacoa? Like, is it tacos?
Yeah. No. So, I mean, our Argentinian style is not a lot of ground beef. So it's usually whole muscle cuts. So and not flank, tri-tip, skirt, ribeyes, sea salt. Very simple. Taste the meat, not covered in marinade. Pre-cooked, and then a lot of chimichurri, and everyone's got their grandmother's recipe of what a real chimichurri tastes like, and that's served on the side, and again a lot of beer to wash it all down. But usually what we say, whole muscle, just meat, salt, that's it. Taste the meat.
Hell yeah.
I
want to have a steak at 9 a.m.
right
now. So that sounds great.
So that was, kind of summer of 2005, starting to launch it. And then it was 4 years before we got our first major retail accounts. And so, started off with air shipments, almost selling beef out of the back of a car to like local restaurants, and really struggling to get volume to scale up. And when you're bringing meat in from South America, when you're doing air shipments, small quantities, very expensive. And we were kind of hitting our head against the wall. And when I say we, it was me full time, my co-founder who went to business school with me, and like a part-time bookkeeper. It was not a big staff. And finally, we got our first opportunity with Wegmans in January of 2009, and then Costco in March of 2009. And probably not the retailer
that's a volume at the gate, brother. Yeah, wow.
And things just really kind of took off in volume from there. We started with containers and bringing on more staff, more systems, more customers, and just kind of running the wave from there.
Was that muscle cuts? Was it all branded like brick packs of ground beef? Like, what was the SKU assortment at that point in time?
Yeah, so Costco was a branded ground beef saddle pack. Wegmans was private label. And so part of the evolution of the company was we were third-party co-pack. because we didn't have enough resources. We can get into the fundraising at some point, but to build out our own processing facility.
Right.
And then, we had a label, but I wouldn't say we really had a brand. And so we just had a very strong supply chain. We started, I think there were 18 farmers in the program when we first launched. Today, there's, thousands globally. So, what we do today, I mean, we couldn't have done it 5 years ago, never mind 15, just as the supply side continues to expand. And at one point, Costco disintermediated us and started their own production line inside their own grind facility out in California. And we transitioned almost all of the business from private label onto the branded side. And that has really happened over the last 5 years. Plus, we built out our own manufacturing facility. So there's been a lot of transitions in the underlying business. Still, the core is the same with that supply chain, but a lot of evolution in all the different components and pillars of the business to get us where we are today, which required hard work, time, money, and so there's been quite a journey between 2009 and 2024.
It sounds like a hell of a journey, and lots of pivots, a lot of transition, and maintaining the integrity of the supply chain. It seems like priority one. And I'm curious. You mentioned 100% grass-fed, grass-finished. You mentioned USDA organic, and you also mentioned your own individual interest in climate solutions and how food intersects with climate. I'm curious, when did the term regeneration first hit your radar, and when did that become a higher priority for the brand, or was it always a high priority and just sort of you realized that term better encompassed what you were looking to achieve?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. So I'd say we were always focused on both organic and grass-fed. We actually dabbled for some time with a non-organic grass-fed program and really decided to go back to our roots of being 100% organic, where we are today. We've always been 100% grass-fed, grass-finished, and we've always been pasture-raised. That's always been a red line for us. I think you'll find that some brands, particularly in the U.S., were feedlot-based with grass-fed pellets. Right. You wouldn't have to, consumers wouldn't know that per se, but we think that's disingenuous. And if you ask consumers what they thought, they wouldn't think that. And so I think regenerative to me is just an evolution of what we've always been doing. I think the term I probably became familiar over the last couple of years. And, it took us a while to both certify the farmers, but when we went to organic, the farmers were naturally farming with organic methods in many cases, and so it's just a certification process. Regenerative, on the other hand, requires fundamental changes in how the land is managed, as well as the certification process. So that's been a multi-year process to get there. And so, we've been working with really core supply chain partners, particularly on the Uruguayan side. We have worked with Land to Market through the certification process. And earlier this year, all of our steaks were converted into Regen certified. The grinds are not at this point, but a lot of the meat is, but not exclusively, and something we're working to. But it's a process, and so again, I would say it's very in line with what our core values, but it's been relatively new in the grand scheme of things in terms of both the definition and change in practices on the ground.
That totally makes sense. And as somebody else who works in grass-fed, grass-finished, that identity preserved SKU you're just talking about, how X portion of the meat is actually regen, but you can't make the consumer-facing claim. I very much understand and respect why we don't do that, but it's also so difficult as a brand. You don't really get that market validation for the work that you're doing until you get the 100% identity preserved regen, right? So that's a conflict point that I feel as you describe that. I'd really like to learn from you. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and at some point we may, let's say, break our SKUs and do a all of it's going to be organic, grass-fed, pasture-raised, but we may do a non-regen SKU and a regen SKU. and that's a possibility. Obviously, adds operational complexity,
Right.
but we're moving in that direction over time.
Totally makes sense. And I'm curious from your perspective, when you go to these farmers in I'm not going to say it right, Uruguay,
Uruguay.
Uruguay, and they've been doing 100% grass-fed, grass-finished for a long time. They're already organic, and you say, hey, we want you to do this land and market verification thing. We want you to change your practices that you've been doing for a long time. What does that look like? What actually needs to change from their operational perspective? And like, what is their reaction both initially and like maybe year 2, year 3?
Generally, I think farmers are very traditional people. Most are not super sophisticated on the technology. They like living off the land and doing what they do. So even when they know they can get a premium and they're already essentially having organic practices, just going through the certification process to do some paperwork is challenging enough.
Yeah.
We've gone a step further and said there's demand for regenerative practices. Not only do you have to do paperwork, but you actually need to change your practices as well. That's a much higher lift. And so there's definitely a price premium that we're extending to the producers. Now, they're also seeing, and we can get into what the practices are, but a shortened life cycle to reach slaughter weight. So they're actually being more profitable as well. And so there's a lot of benefit at the farm level for implementing these practices from a pure profitability standpoint. It was interesting. I was at a farm last year. One side of the street, which is a dirt road, had regen practices, grass chest high. The other side of the street, no regen practice and essentially barren. I mean, you could just see the change in the practices have such a dramatic effect on soil quality, water retention, which leads to healthier grass, which leads to better content for the animals to eat, and putting on gain faster.
So Dana, I apologize, but I got to interrupt you on this. I was trying to not do that, but I'm so interested in this story of how grazing cattle differently, just grazing cattle differently and strategically, can lead to a faster or a shorter time frame of them putting on the weight they need to reach slaughter. That is fascinating. I've never heard that before. It totally makes sense to me, but I want you to really kind of drill into the why there. Why is that the case?
Yeah, so this was the most surprising thing to me because I heard people, regen as a buzzword, and until I got on the ground and I saw it in practice, it was, light bulb goes off. And I'll go to what it means in a second, but the conversations that I have, whether it's with press or buyers or consumers, my own employees, it's the same thing. And until they really hear the story, it's a buzzword. It sounds good, like who wouldn't want regenerative? But it's real. It's a change in practice, and it has very real effects. All right, so what is it? So typically the farms, let's say, are 800 to 1,000 hectares. They might be subdivided by some rickety fencing into 3 different sections. And so the cattle are out, and you got 2 gauchos on horseback, and I'll be somewhat facetious, but we'll see you in a couple years. When they go to regenerative practices, they'll have either real fencing or sometimes virtual fencing, almost like what we have with dogs and dog collars. And the paddocks will get divided into 1 or 2 hectares each and be rotated every day, every couple days. And so it's a totally different dynamic where the grass will be high. And once the cattle eat their way through that grass, there's manure, they stomp on the grass and the dirt that's remaining. And so it gets churned up quite a bit. And then they move on to the next section, and they move on to the next section, they move on to the next section. And so that process with the soil getting churned results in much healthier soil. Whatever water there is retained much better. And then the grass grows faster again. And so, again, we go back to this idea of gain. So how many pounds per day? The cattle gain much faster in these systems than without. And so you might be getting an animal to slaughter weight in 20 to 24 months versus 30 to 36 months. I mean, for the farmer, that is huge. That's complete game
It's a
changer.
33% reduction. I mean,
Yeah.
that's wild.
Yeah.
So from a profitability standpoint, it's much better. From the consumer standpoint, the quality of the meat for an animal that's at 20 to 24 versus 30 to 36, much more tender, much more flavorful. And so the quality of our steaks has just gone up. And I think it's the best of the best in terms of the grass fed that's out there.
I mean, it's the perfect example of like everyone wins in regen, why it's so powerful. And for those that don't watch the video, we're having this like angelic moment where Dana's skylight is like beaming on him as he's having this beautiful epiphany and explanation. But like to encapsulate that as short as possible, it's basically the cows eat grass. This helps you grow more grass faster, so the cows can eat more of it faster. So they're going to be at that slaughter weight quicker, and it's going to be more profitable for the farmer. And agnostic of everything else, this theme that keeps coming up on the show is like, if we can make the practices more profitable for farmers, we will win, no matter what the consumer education or adoption is, no matter how brands market it, no matter, agnostic to all these other things. And I think we always have to ground the conversation in that.
Yeah. And I was on a panel last month at the Animal Ag Tech Show in San Francisco, and I was on with Paul Grieve from Pasture Bird, Better For You, pasture raised, regen poultry, true believer. What was so interesting was next to him was someone that does backgrounding of cattle that goes into the feedlot system that will never see regen on the package, and a full believer in regenerative systems. And because it's more profitable for the farmer. And like, it doesn't matter if the consumer knows. And well, obviously, we'd love to publicize it and make consumers aware. It's good for the planet, for the domestic farmers that are going into the feedlot system to be doing this as well. And so I think it's a really powerful concept. And when one farmer does it, they go to their neighbor and their neighbor's neighbor, and these things really start to spread. So, I'm pretty encouraged by that conversation and viewpoint as well.
Totally. And there's so much I love about this story, and AC definitely clicked on one of the most important pieces, like profitability for the farmer, right? One of the other like major counter arguments you always hear about regenerative agriculture is that you can't feed the planet using regenerative practices.
We can't feed the world.
Yeah, and it's like, well, we just literally prove that you can actually raise cattle faster on the same plot of land and generate more meat per year using regenerative practices, right? So that's incredible. Part 3, and we haven't touched on this yet. We've had this conversation a few times before, but I always think it's a good refresher. Like, what are the environmental benefits when you start to have that sort of like high stock density grazing and or mob grazing, whatever term you want to use, on the land? What actually happens to the land from either a water infiltration perspective, soil microbial perspective? Walk us through all those benefits.
Yeah. So again, go back to this domestic rancher. He was in southeast Colorado, and east of the Rockies, relatively dry climate. And so if the soil is able to capture the rain, it's just a healthier ecosystem. And so when farmers switch to these practices, you start seeing biodiversity just naturally return. You don't have to do anything. You'll start seeing more birds and wildlife return. And then one of the things that I really like about Lance Market and their EOV program is they're literally digging into the soil. They're doing soil samples, looking at the microbial health at the soil level, and it's better. It's good with organic. It's even better with the regen systems on top of that.
Yeah, and just to use the Colorado example, I believe the stat is for every 1% increase in soil organic matter, the water holding capacity of soil increases by 20,000 gallons per acre. So to your point, in an environment where there's not a lot of precipitation, the more you can capture, the better it is for the entire ecosystem. Like the benefits are just monumental. So Really appreciate that example.
Yeah. And so one of the impediments is the farmer has to do something different. And that's not inconsequential by any means.
Right.
And so this farmer that I mentioned down in Uruguay, he implemented this system, which was a lot of work to get this new fencing system in. He had to change the irrigation system on his property. And so a ton of work and money initially. But now he spends an hour a day resetting the fences, and he spends the rest of the day reading.
Yeah.
and he's the most profitable he's ever been. And so it's really fascinating. You need to get over that inertia and this hump. But once you get to the other side, there's a ton of benefits throughout the entire supply chain.
And how long did it take him to transition? Is that a 1 year cycle? Is that 6 months? Is that 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not days or weeks, but I mean, legit months, I would say, at a minimum, and depending on the complexity
Right.
of what people are trying to do. And it might be a year plus, probably less than 5 years, but they're depending on how big the properties are. If you have a canyon in it, you might have these virtual systems that require essentially cellular towers to be placed around the property. Computer systems.
Getting water to the animals is also like very important. I've heard people talk about that a lot. Is they have to have the water too, and getting that around the different paddocks can be challenging.
Yeah, and obviously every paddock is different, and so Colorado guy has canyons in his land.
Yeah.
It makes
Complex.
the wireless signals more challenging. It makes water more challenging. Sometimes you might have a good water source and slightly rolling hills. That's a lot easier. So every particular situation's a little bit different.
Dana, can you throw on your CMO hat for a second and try and articulate to us how y'all look at y'all's like claims architecture? My assumption, based on just looking at the brand, the website, and at retail, is organic is still the most important thing that y'all feel like consumers look at first, and then probably grass fed, and then regen's kind of this emerging thing that you think has this, a lot of tailwinds and is going to be important in the future. But just talk to us about like that hierarchy and where you see that now and where you see it in the future.
Yeah, so my head of marketing and commercial side will be very happy.
Yeah.
That is how we prioritize it,
Yeah.
and that's based on consumer feedback. And so, regardless of what I think or we think is the most important, what do consumers think? The USDA organic bug is known throughout the entire grocery store, and so I think both the word organic and that USDA organic symbol is very powerful, very well known. When we first started, I would say that was by far number one, because just like today, consumers don't understand regen. 20 years ago, no one had ever heard of grass-fed beef.
Yeah.
And that's different. So grass-fed pasture raised has definitely gone up, and I would say somewhat equivalent with organic. But I also think that organic is more differentiating. And so there's less people, and we're definitely the leader in that space, that are doing both organic and grass-fed. Regen is more known on the trade side than the consumer side. And I think there's both the term, there's not one icon logo that represents regen, and so I think in terms of positioning, we're doing it more on we can talk about the branding side, but outside of packaging, we've put it on front of pack, but it's definitely tertiary, below organic and grass-fed.
What about from retailers? Are retailers asking questions about regen, or are they wanting to spotlight it? Is it still just kind of like a cool thing that they don't care a ton about for your retailer mix? Like, what's that look like?
I think it depends, and I don't think it's consistent across retailers. So when we announced last year that we were going to do this, some were super excited. BJ's was a great example. We gave them some time-based exclusivity when we launched. They were super excited. Others would be in the middle, and others probably like, meh. But I think this whole movement for not only better for you beef, but better for you protein has really been driven by consumers and getting pulled through the retail supply chain. I don't think it's really been retailer led. And I think some of that has to do with who the meat buyers have been, which have been traditional, older butchers that have grown up behind the case and are not the organic grass-fed consumer.
Yeah.
And so they're going to buy what they want to eat. I think that's changed over the last 5+ years, where there's been turnover in the buyer segment. And as the buyers get younger, more female, more kind of forward leaning, I think there's more alignment between the buyer and the end consumer. And I think that's part of the reason we're seeing acceleration as well.
Super interesting angle there. We've talked about, educating those buyers and category managers, but bringing in the actual demographic and that transition is super insightful, and I think and accurate, what you just described.
And remember, the buyer is buying. They're not raising cattle or buying, all the different attributes. And so there's nothing better than getting the buyers out onto the farm so they can see it firsthand. But they're not experts on raising cattle either. And so, part of our job is educating them as well.
Yeah, I would imagine of all the different buying desks, meat probably fits that demographic better than anybody else that you just talked about. That sort of like older meat case generation, like I'd imagine like a producer, like a functional beverage buyer probably doesn't quite fit that demographic the same way as it does in meat, right?
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. But I do want to let's stay on the brand. You all have beautiful packaging. It's very, to me, intentional, and it's like designed to evoke a specific emotion. Has that always been the case, or has that changed over time? Like when did this rebrand hit, and how has it been received thus far?
So let me just put the interview back to you. What emotions are evoked when you see it? What do you?
I like it.
Great question. So for me, like when I see this, it really, it's almost like the way you were telling the story, like the romantic version of like how food happens, right? So like I look at the cows literally grazing on pasture with the river, the blue skies, and the sun. It almost makes me feel hope in a way. Is if I could describe it in one word, it would be hopeful. Maybe that's my own, like, I don't want to use the term baggage, but like romantic sense of like what beef can do, right? But yeah, that's what I'd say is hope.
Awesome. So yeah, that's where we're going. So it was not always like that. And if you look at most of the case, it's not like that. And so there's a lot of private label within the meat sector. And usually the private label brands are very functional. They're not emotional. And so they'll have a list of attributes and some words on there. Even when you get to the branded side, it's not like that. It's functional as well. And so when we made this transition of being a private label company to a branded CPG company, there were a number of transitions. And one was moving from customer first to consumer first. And that was really a shift in mindset.
Yeah.
And we did a lot of consumer research. We did focus groups. We did shop-alongs. We did qualitative surveys, small scale, large scale. And we wanted to tell a story. We wanted to evoke emotion. We want to show up different in the case. And if you see our packaging today, it's totally different from anything else that's in the meat case. And it's shown we're now the number one velocity, better for you beef item in the category. And
oh yeah, congrats.
Nice.
Yeah, and we need to keep growing our distribution, but wherever we're at, people are responding. I think one, the product has to taste good. It could have all the attributes in the world. If it tastes like shit, people aren't going to buy it twice. But so the packaging is our number one point of interaction with the consumer, and so they might pick it up once because of the packaging. They need the product to eat great. To buy it that second time and beyond. And I think we're delivering on both of those.
Yeah, and I almost wonder, and I don't mean to be too judgmental and or stereotypical here, but it almost feels like it's designed for more of a feminine shopper.
The mom.
And I think that's very unique in your category. Yeah, exactly. You're targeting moms. And again, I think that's super unique for your category. It's a lot of masculine brands out there. So you probably are super well differentiated and are like really honing in on that specific consumer segment. Was that part of the goal?
Yeah, definitely to appeal to a broader base. So women do most of the food shopping,
Right.
but when it comes to meat, they feel generally very uncomfortable. Just what we started with of this overwhelming wall of meat, and so that making a package that's approachable, I think, is very important. Then you go to the cooking side, and it's generally men that are doing the cooking of the meat,
Yeah.
and the women doing everything else. On average,
Right.
and so it's an interesting dynamic within this category for sure.
It's so interesting to think about that. I'm like having flashbacks of like going to the grocery store with my parents and like my mom walking the store, but like sending dad to get the meat and the seafood, right? And then he's like grilling it or whatever. And like it's so
Yeah.
true. And
And even at my house, I do the grills, I do the green egg,
yeah,
and wife is doing the cooking inside the house.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I really want to highlight that consumer first versus customer first mentality, because I think what's come to light in a very unfortunate way in some regards about CPG recently is like a lot of people have put retailer demands first and created bad business outcomes for themselves because they've really bent to the will of retailers that haven't been aligned with consumer preference or demand. And so it's very clear that y'all have done like a ton of research and been intentional about that. And we need to do that individually for our regenerative brand so they can be operationally successful, but also as a regenerative movement. I think what Kyle and I get most disheartened about is like we spend so much time in the internal firing squad, in trade, focusing on dumb shit that we don't really feel like moves the needle, instead of like trying to better understand how to get the common man or woman to care about this stuff, which is like actually what will move the needle. So I just thought there was a lot of threads to pull out on that one, and appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, and I think there certainly the packaging, the design aspect of the packaging is huge. The product inside is huge. We've done a lot in terms of adding functionality, things like easy peel, so you don't have to take a pair of scissors and getting your hands full of purge. We've adjusted the seal technology so you don't see a bunch of liquid in the package. And we've been able to accomplish that by having our own manufacturing plant and really being able to control those details as well.
I want to talk about two things on the capitalization and the growth side that I think are just important lessons for us to harvest for listeners and other brands, Dana, which are what has that manufacturing journey been like, and why did you invest in your own processing facility, and how maybe that like decision criteria has looked different than other meat brands in the space because you buy cuts instead of whole animals. So that's one. Try to remember all that. And then secondly is, you basically bootstrapped and self-funded this thing until a very important growth equity investor, Mandatory, came in pretty recently, and would love for you to just talk about that journey and why you went that direction, what they've been like. So would love to talk about the manufacturing and the recent investment.
Yeah, so we launched our own manufacturing facility in the fall of 2019. We made the decision in 2018, so it was less than a year from making the decision to launching the facility. We launched 6 months prior to COVID. Thank God we did.
Yeah.
And as we were planning a nice gradual ramp, our primary co-packer shut down in May of 2020, and we had to move our major programs in 72 hours.
That ramp became a roller coaster real quick.
Yeah. So I was like dark hair, before I started this thing. I still have hair, but the last couple of years has been a roller coaster for sure.
Yeah.
And so if we didn't have our own plant, we probably would have had to shut down during the COVID time period.
Wow.
It caused a lot of chaos, managed chaos for that time period.
Do you mean you would have sporadically like just had to like stop operations? Or are you saying like the brand would have been in jeopardy like totally if you didn't have your own facility?
I mean, the plant shut down and they were our primary processor.
Wow.
So, it would have been a gap. It was more than like a couple days that we would not have been able to have output. And, who knows, but that environment was highly unusual to say the least.
Yeah.
But if you don't have product on the shelf, and the programs we do are 52 weeks a year, and part of why we've been successful over time is our high fill rate and high accuracy. and it's built on the back of the supply chain. And so if you're not in store and stocked, I mean, the retailers are going to find someone else who is.
Yeah.
And so that's been, making that decision to internalize has been absolutely critical. So, going back to the rationale, we wanted to have more control over quality. There's things we wanted to do. We have 4-color process registered film. We have easy peel. We have certain seal technology. There's we wanted to customize it and shape it for our particular operation. We're also very close to the Port of Philadelphia, so it's more where our imported product comes in. So it's more efficient than sending it out to another plant. Food safety, we can be under our auspices. So, multiple reasons for doing that. It also requires a complete change, just like going from private label to brand is not just putting, doing some cute artwork. Like there's a fundamental transformation of how you go to market. We have category management, our trade marketing, our social media presence. All of that is completely new and different, and it's hard. It's really hard to do, and takes the right expertise. It takes resources, and we can go into the mana side, but those are resources that we did not have for many years as we were really scaling up.
I'm really curious about the journey from a lot of the retail accounts you've been talking about haven't been like the traditional natural channel startup towards conventional MULO. And I feel like that's primarily because of the private label first opportunities. But now that you have the brand, how are you thinking about that sort of like omni-channel strategy? Are you looking to get more into natural? Are you planning to stay where you are? What does that relationship look like from like a sales strategic perspective?
Yeah, so some of it might have been just I came from the high tech sector and didn't know better, and where were the opportunities, and you start with some of the most major ones. We've diversified over time, so we're in club, we're in mainstream with like Kroger, Albertsons, Schnucks, we're in fresh market, we're in Amazon Fresh as their national fresh organic grass-fed beef brand. We're going national at Target. We started with 2 regions. We're now on the 3rd, and we'll be national in the fall.
Nice.
So we're really at this point are omni-channel, and there's definitely more doors to go, and that's a core part of the strategy. But we've definitely expanded from where we started.
I think it's super interesting. You just don't hear a lot of success stories from brands taking that route. And, whether it's your quote ignorance or not, like
it works.
You're selling to the customers who want the product. That's the right thing to do. You know what I mean? You don't have to choose the more challenging road where like people aren't asking for it. Like, take the easy path, right? And I don't want to say that it was easy, but, why create more unnecessary friction?
Well, the theme.
So I think it's awesome. And
sorry to cut you off.
Go ahead.
The theme there that seems to be coming across in a lot of the episodes is the brand is not what am I trying to say? There's more of a symbiotic relationship between the brand and the supply chain, where the brand actually makes key business decisions to be in service of the supply chain versus just it being super transactional. And it's very clear over the arc of the company, you've done that, right? And that's why the supply chain has been with you this long, and it's allowed you to kind of pivot, but the volume and the attributes and the good things about it have kind of stayed the same throughout.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, it started with the supply chain and somewhat built the company. And so, transforming from private label to brand, from third-party co-pack to internal manufacturing, really fundamental changes to how we operate the business. But the supply chain has always been core from the beginning, and it is today as well.
So you've got this beautiful brand now. You've got the processing dialed in. What is next for Verde? Is it, getting more cuts out there? Is it focusing on those more doors? What's the next 1, 3, 5 years look like?
Yeah, I think it's more doors. And so I'd say, scaled back and concentrated on our core set of items, meaning organic, grass-fed, regen, raw single ingredient. That's the core of what we do. And as I mentioned, we're top velocity within the category. It's really there. We're in thousands of points of distribution. We want to continue to expand. We have the supply, we have the capacity, we have the model dialed in. We want to do more of that. That's really core. I think eventually there'll be opportunities to expand either additional cuts, more ready to cook, ready to eat type items when we have permission from both the retailer and the consumer to do that. That will come, I'm sure, with time as well.
What about Manitree made them the right partner to help capitalize some of that future growth? I mean, I'm sure big transition for you personally. You're not the CEO anymore. You're clearly still very involved. You're founder board member, but there's been a lot of a change, right? So like, what's that process been like, and how is it to go through that with them?
Yeah, so it's been a journey. So just go back. So I bootstrapped the company, had about $100,000 of from options that I made when I was in Silicon Valley prior to business school, and took out student loans, and that was really the startup capital in 2005. And we didn't raise any money until January of 2020, and again 2 months before COVID. So the timing was great. We also scaled up everything then as well. So first, there's a big decision to release control between my partner and I from 100% to even having a minority partner. Manitree is focused on food as health, food as medicine. And so there was a natural alignment of their mission with ours. Certainly the capital, we needed as we scaled up the manufacturing and did this transition to the brand. And just having the people behind it being really aligned with what we're trying to accomplish was really important as well. So that was the initial investment in January of 2020. I didn't step down as CEO until just a few months ago. So January of 2024, we brought on an outside president in May of last year, so almost exactly a year ago, with the intention for him to succeed me. He's an experienced, seasoned CPG professional. So we're really leaning into that CPG branded protein aspect of what we're trying to accomplish. And I think that's also just, after 20 years, fresh leadership, fresh mindset is really helpful. I'm still majority shareholder as of today, active on the board and doing some business development work, but just stepping away from the day-to-day, which I think is healthy for me, family, and the company as well.
More time for podcasts with people like us too, so we appreciate that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep, absolutely.
Get back to world traveling. Go eat some food in Argentina, Live your best life.
Yeah. And it's been interesting because we've been able to accomplish that. We do travel as a family quite a bit. My kids, including when they were still in strollers, have their passports. They've been to Argentina or Uruguay. We actually looked at beef in Namibia. We've traveled to Australia on a 3-week road trip that was like half beach, half slaughterhouse. And so, we've just found these ways to incorporate the business and personal side over the past 20 years. One
of my favorite things about the regen space is the intersection of intellect and humility that so many of our founders have. And it's so clear, like it came through so clearly in this interview, Dana, that you see that and you're like, hey, maybe I'm not the right person to be in the same role that I've been to take this to the next level, even though I'm going to be a part of it in this way. So just really cool. And it seems like the meat sector specifically is a very humbling sector, and some of our most humble, but also very intelligent founders come from that sector just because of the challenges that it presents.
Yeah. And I mean, even 20 years in, where I somewhat joke, but it was somewhat true. Didn't know much about the meat sector when I joined.
Yeah.
I still feel like 20 years in, I'm like, I don't know that much. And I know quite a bit. There's just so much to always learn. And, I've done more in this category, obviously, than others, but it's a unique animal, pardon the pun. It's just different than I think any other sector. There's a lot of challenges and how you navigate it. It's been fun. It's been challenging. It's been hard, but rewarding nonetheless.
one of my favorite quotes of all time, and I probably said it before on the podcast, is, as our island of knowledge grows, so too do the shores of our ignorance. And it's like this constant journey of like, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Yeah.
And I just really, like AC said, really appreciate that mentality.
And it's true.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we have to ask you to set the humility aside to answer our last question, because it's a rather tough one. But Dana, just to take us home, it's the one we ask everybody, which is, how do we get regen brands to have 50% market share by 2050? How do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, continue pushing with educating the consumer, educating the customer, educating the press, and putting out great product. If the product's not good, the rest of it doesn't matter. But I think the more that our stakeholders are aware of what the challenges are and how this product can help solve these issues, the more that everyone will continue to demand these items. The better for you beef segment and the one with the most attributes is the highest growth within the beef sector. And over the last 5 years in a row, we've continued to take share. And what started out as a very small segment is now a meaningful part. It's still minority share for sure, but it has continued to take share year after year after year. And we're moving in the right direction. We need to hit scale. We're not going to do it on a completely fragmented, hyper regional basis. I think it's going to require national players, national brands. So I do think they'll be sorting out within a very fragmented segment today. But I think that will help for being economically sustainable, and that's required to make an industry sustainable segment really come to fruition.
Love that. Well, super appreciate your time, Dana. That's I'm trying not to geek out too much on data and share right now, because I was just super passionate about data and share. But we'll have to
Geek
talk
out,
about
bro.
that. I mean, I know what it's like, Pete, our next period release for syndicated drops Monday, right? And I know how exciting it can be, especially going up against like incumbents in the category who are doing things the wrong way, to be that better for you sector and to walk in every 4 weeks and analyze the new data, be like, man, we cracked 10% this year for the first time, or now we're up to 15, or whatever that continual battle is, and how exciting it is to bring a better for you subset into this, like, again, incumbent, not necessarily ethical category. So just love that journey for you. It's a great time. It's a fun ride.
Yeah, and I think that balance between being a meat company and a branded CPG company. So you talked about syndicated data dropping. Well, 10, 15 years ago, we weren't doing syndicated data. I think a lot of our competitors probably aren't as well. And the buyers probably didn't want to see syndicated data either. Now, when we go in, I mentioned category management, we're telling a great story, success with our existing customers, growth within the segment. How can we help you, retailer, do a better job? That story is really winning. Our brand is up 50% year over year. So there's clearly something happening.
And Dana, what's the category doing relative to your brand? Is category at like, 5, 10, 15? What's your outpay?
Oh, yeah, we're definitely significantly over-indexing relative to the category. Yeah, we're awesome. Taking share in a growing category.
Love that. So, huge.
Yeah, you want to have, pick the right category with the right team, and then over-deliver, and, then generally good things happen.
Awesome. Well, for those who want to learn more, check out verdefarms.com. Again, you can check out the beautiful branding. It's fantastic. Dana, we super appreciate the time. AC, I feel like I cut you off. Was there something else you wanted to add?
The last thought I had was just, that's what I love so much about beef, is we can have amazing brands like Verde and others that we've had on that are identity preserved, super high attribute, branded, etc. And that feedlot gentleman that you talked about, Dana, that producer that just sells into the feedlot. If we can get regen practices on all those acres too, it makes a huge difference. And so, there's multiple levers of positive change, which I think is always important to highlight and just gets me fired up. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Thanks for joining us, man. This was awesome and super informative. Appreciate you.
Thanks. It was fun.
For show notes, episode transcripts, and more information on our guests and what we discuss on the show, check out our website, regen-brands.com. That is regen-brands.com. You can also find our Regen recaps on the website. Regen recaps take less than 5 minutes to read and cover all the key points of the full hour-long conversations. You can check out our YouTube channel, Regen Brands Podcast, for all of our episodes with both video and audio. The best way to support our work is to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform, subscribe to future episodes, and share the show with your friends. Thanks for tuning in to the Regen Brands Podcast, brought to you by the Regen Coalition and Outlaw Ventures. We hope you learned something new in this episode, and it empowers you to use your voice, your time, and your dollars to help us build a better and more regenerative food system. Love you guys.